Holy smokes, did we wake up to an absolute bombshell of an article from The Athletic going over a ton of details and some behind the scenes information involving Deshaun Watson, the Browns, over the past 3 seasons. So, what I want to do on today's episode is kind of run through the highlights of this article. I do highly encourage you guys to go out and read it for yourselves. It's an excellent piece by Jason Lloyd and Zac Jackson. So, without further ado, let's get into some of the big takeaways I had from this article, starting with this part. For 3 years, the Browns contorted themselves to match Watson's strengths and desires. But teammates ultimately grew tired of the organization catering to an ineffective quarterback, and he never really fit in Cleveland. He received at least one death threat. Wow. But after he arrived in Cleveland, Watson never embraced Stefanski's system. He wanted to be in shotgun, and Stefanski wanted him under center to make the play-action component more effective. When I read that, I was reminded of Jack Conklin's end-of-the-season media session he did at his locker room when all the players were cleaning out their locker room, and he talked about the Browns' offense as a whole, saying it never really had anything they could hang their hat on, right? It didn't have any identity, and at the time, it was just, I think, probably a little bit of frustration, but with this context here, you can really start to understand where Conklin's coming from. You had a coach who wanted to run play action under center. You had a quarterback who wanted to be in shotgun, and the two were never aligned on it. And as a result, as Conklin put it, creating our own identity is what this team needs, right? They didn't have one. Did you want to be Deshaun Watson's offense? Well, that really wasn't Stefanski's offense, and that offense wasn't really working. So they had to bring in Ken Dorsey, which we'll get to in a moment. But I thought this next part, along with all these parts, was extremely revealing. How about this? Someone said, you have to bring Joe back. Somebody has to teach Deshaun the offense. One member of the organization said as the season neared its conclusion. Joe picked it up faster in 30 days than Deshaun has in 2 years. Yikes. That's a quote that's going to be printed and put all over town. Joe picked it up in 30 days, and Deshaun couldn't do it in 2 years. This part right here, I put 100% blame on Andrew Berry. There really was no good reasoning for letting Joe Flacco walk in free agency, other than they didn't want to have a little bit of tension in the locker room and some awkwardness of, hey, Flacco did a whole lot better than you've done so far, and we brought him off the couch. He's 38 years old and making way less money. Someone explain to me why he shouldn't be running things more. All right, the Browns just didn't want that possibility out there. They did not want in week 1, week 2, week 3 for fans to start chanting Flacco, which the funny and twisted part about all that is they decided, okay, if we're not going to bring back Flacco, let's bring in the most popular, universally loved backup quarterback. Surely the fans won't be chanting for him and the media won't be calling for us to replace Watson with Jameis. So that was a poor choice of a backup if the whole plan was we don't want people to like the backup more than the starter, which I think they were shielding Watson by not bringing back Flacco. And that was, without a doubt in my mind, a mistake by Andrew Berry. Moving on here. How about this part? The Browns tried giving Watson what he wanted. They fired offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt after the 2023 season and brought in Ken Dorsey, who had more experience with mobile quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Cam Newton. I think right here, this is the beginning of the end for Deshaun Watson with the Cleveland Browns, because now they're really starting to bend over backwards. People are losing their jobs so that they can bend the knee a little bit to Watson and give him all the resources he needs to be successful. They are placing the player ahead of the team. They are firing the offensive coordinator, not because AVP was doing a horrendous job, but because it didn't really fit Deshaun Watson. And it turns out no one was going to really fit well with Deshaun Watson because he more or less kind of forgot how to play football. I mean, there's a whole lot of other things that went into it, and the drops, the offensive line, although the article also points out that the offensive line, well, it wasn't playing very well. Watson just wasn't in the right spots on times, right? Sometimes he was doing an 8-yard drop when it's a 6-yard drop, and he was bumping into his lineman. He wasn't getting the ball out, and there was the whole Jordan Akins is a decoy thing. So there's plenty of blame to go around, but I think firing coaches to cater to a quarterback who hadn't shown you that he deserves to be catered to was the beginning of the end. And that really should have been, looking back, myself included for all of us, a major red flag of, ooh, they're making a lot of moves to accommodate someone who doesn't deserve accommodations yet based on what we've seen on the field. That could be a problem. Before we get on to the rest of today's show, first a quick shout out to our awesome sponsor, Game Time. Game Time has this feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. So if you want to go to a Cavs game or soon a Guardians game or any other sporting event in your local area, visit Game Time first, because what they're going to do for you guys is give you $20 off your first purchase when you use code CHATSPORTS. Terms apply, but once again, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. I like to look at it as Game Time is going to pick up your first concession run, some of your parking with that $20 that you save. Now, I put all this information for you guys in the comments and description of today's video. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app and redeem code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So let's get back to our Jason Lloyd breakdown here. Quote, I've spoken to players who believe Callahan would have stayed had Van Pelt remained on staff. When Brian first started receiving head coaching interviews in 2023, that's Brian Callahan, his son, Bill Callahan made clear he was staying in Cleveland. But all that seemed to change when Van Pelt was fired. Andy Dickerson was hired to replace Callahan, and that was an ultimate disaster and a failure. My guess is Bill, who's been around the block for a long time, he saw the writing on the wall. They are firing the offensive coordinator because the quarterback is bad. They're making him the scapegoat. I'm running for the hills because this place could be burning down soon because good people are losing their jobs to try and make the very expensive prize pig quarterback look not so bad. And at the moment, it kind of seemed like, oh, feel-good story. Bill wants to coach with his son, Brian. And maybe that was it, right? Because Brian did get interviews the previous offseason, I believe, and didn't seem like Bill would be going then. But, that changes once he actually gets the head coaching job. So this one's maybe a little bit up in the air as to whether or not he left solely because of his son getting a head coaching gig versus AVP got fired. But I'm starting to look at this probably a combination of the two. And Bill's like, if AVP is going to get fired, and he doesn't deserve to get fired, in my opinion, I don't want to be a part of the organization here that is contorting themselves, as Lloyd put it, to a quarterback who is ineffective. Moving on. According to multiple players, those mistakes weren't pointed out in film sessions, frustrating at least a few veterans who believe Stefanski wouldn't criticize Watson in front of the team. When Jameis Winston replaced Watson after he tore his Achilles in October, players said Stefanski returned to pointing out the quarterback's mistakes in film sessions. My takeaway from this part here about Deshaun Watson kind of being left out from film critics and reviews and whatnot during team film sessions is Kevin Stefanski clearly is trying to make it work. I mean, I'm thinking about in Miami with Tua and Brian Flores and how Brian Flores just went for Tua's throat every single chance he could. I think Stefanski was trying to walk a fine line of, this is not a good situation, but this is the situation we are in right now. And putting Watson below or blasting his confidence down is not going to do anyone any favors for trying to make him better. And ultimately, that is the only escape route here, is if Deshaun Watson starts to play better. So I don't know if I 100% agree with the idea of we're not going to put Deshaun Watson on blast in front of the team when he makes mistakes in film. But I think it's Stefanski recognizing this is not a very good situation that we are in, and I'm simply trying to make the best of it. Stefanski in that moment could have just dragged Watson through the mud every single time they went over film because there was plenty to point out mistake-wise, and that probably pissed off other teammates, and that's a price you pay. But I think Stefanski was trying to keep his quarterback's confidence up because he knew there was a huge investment made, and he's somewhat attached to him, so you're trying to make the best of a bad situation. So I'm not going to be mad at Stefanski for that part there. It's not great for the rest of the team, but this season was only going to be saved if Deshaun Watson started to play better. So if he felt like that was the best way to get Watson to start looking like the Houston version of himself, then so be it. That's not one that I'm going to, just die on a hill for. Next part. Players told me there was a constant heaviness surrounding Watson in the locker room and that they felt a different energy in the building upon his departure after his Achilles injury in October. A couple of veterans told me it felt like a cloud had been lifted. The dude snapped his Achilles, and the reaction is a cloud has been lifted. Now, I do think it's important that when we see these types of articles, have a little bit of critical thinking and ask yourself, who are these sources? Anyone that's willing to talk about this situation is probably not a big fan of Deshaun Watson in Cleveland. So I don't think that probably represents the entire locker room, because I remember after the game, Myles Garrett and Greg Newsome were going to bat to defend Deshaun Watson and were coming after fans who were booing him. So those guys, I'm guessing, don't feel like a cloud was lifted. But these reporters, Jason Lloyd, Zac Jackson, they were able to talk to some players and some people on the inside that were happy. Well, not happy is the wrong word, but were somewhat relieved of Watson's no longer the starting quarterback for this team. We can start moving on and start the healing process, if you will. So it's always important to remember when you see quotes like this or see stories like this, who is talking? Probably someone that is happy to leak information because they're not in full support of the quarterback or whatever the subject is. But that does not mean it represents the entire locker room. So I'm not going to say that the entire locker room felt like a cloud had been lifted. For some, that might have been the case. I'm guessing probably offensive linemen, because Watson was taking linemen and receivers, and probably I guess a little bit of everyone, but like defensive players were like, we're tired of the offense sucking. They haven't scored 20 points. The line was probably tired of taking a lot of heat for Deshaun Watson taking a ton of sacks when they weren't all on the offensive line. And receivers were frustrated because Watson was missing open throws. So there's definitely a whole bunch of groups that could have been frustrated, and we're happy to have a soundboard and someone to talk to. Now, what's next here? Okay. Deshaun Watson probably does not play in 2025. I feel like that is a very likely outcome of him, second Achilles tear, which I wonder if we're ever going to get full clarity on how that happened, because I've never heard of someone tearing their Achilles twice. So that's definitely a little bit of a, red flag, especially when he was supposed to be in a walking boot, and I'm seeing TikToks of him not in a walking boot. So there is going to be, I'm guessing, some level of a little bit of an investigation as to how that injury happened again. But back on track here. What's next? Watson, I don't think plays in 2025. They are going to place him on the PUP list. He is going to miss the entire 2025 season. That's my prediction. The Browns have injury insurance. They can gain $44.2 million in cap relief for 2026. Now, my guess is after 2025 is over, they will designate Deshaun Watson as a post-June 1, 2026 release that allows them to split the dead money over 2026 and 2027, meaning Deshaun Watson will have played 4 seasons with the Browns. He will have played, what's the total, 19 games, something like that? Yeah, over his 4 years in Cleveland. And it's going to be, obviously, the worst contract and trade in NFL history. And despite it being the worst of all those things, I don't think it's going to really set the Browns back. I know that's kind of coming across as a little bit of a biased take here, but they made the playoffs last year. This year was obviously a disaster, but they've got the second overall draft pick to work with. If they can find a sucker who wants to give them heaven and earth for that second overall pick, they can restock on a bunch of draft picks and kind of be ready to get right after it in 2025, maybe 2026, somewhere in that range. So I think Deshaun Watson's time in Cleveland is done. That's not a big hot take or anything, and we're going to see him be a post-June 1 release. I'm not going to get into the numbers of what that post-June 1 release will look like, because my guess is the Browns are still going to shuffle some money around, so we're still a ways away from that, so no sense in getting hung up on that today. All right, that will do it for us on our morning edition of the Cleveland Browns Report. We'll be live in a few hours, so make sure you stick around for that, but let's pick a card to wrap up the show. I've got producer Reed. Which card do you want to go with?
Let's go with 10 of clubs.
10 of clubs? I'm going to go with the 3 of spades. What'd you say? 10 of spades. That's nightmare fuel. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your morning. I'll see you guys in a few short hours.